Hey, Dave Sobel here from the Business of Tech podcast. Here live streaming on Wednesday, January 22nd, 2020. I am here to talk a little bit about some of the stories that I did not cover that I thought were of interest. So I want to give you a little bit of insight. Every day I do a podcast called The Business of Tech. You can find it on mspradio.com with all the subscribe links. You can subscribe on your favorite podcatcher on Amazon Alexa-enabled devices or on YouTube for daily updates. It's just 5 minutes, gives you what you need to know and why, particularly if you are in the technology services delivery business. That's the focus that I've got. I do a couple of stories and give some insight into why. With the live streams, I like to do a little bit more free form and talk something about some of the stories I may not have covered or go deeper into something that I may not have had time to on the podcast. So that's what I do here live. Additionally, I will be interacting with people online. You can communicate via the chat window on any of the favorite platforms, and I'll answer any questions that you might have. I've got 4 stories I want to talk about today that I did not cover that I'm going to break down and talk a little bit about what they are and why I didn't cover them. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to cover the first one. I'm going to start with one that is familiar to many of you in this particular space. If you've been in the IT delivery services, I want to talk a little bit about a story I intentionally did not cover. Kaseya makes an announcement that they are worth over $2 billion. So let's talk about this and exactly what that means, because I think it's important to actually break it down. They did a press release. That's the start of this story. And then from there, it gets picked up. The story gets picked up by all of the places that just reprint these kinds of stories. And then they do get converted into actual media stories. So friends at Channel EDE did some coverage on this. Think very highly of this, but why I didn't cover this? Essentially, the story is Kaseya put out a press release. They say, we're worth $2 billion. That's the whole story. Anybody can declare anything. I declare this pen is worth $1 billion. Unless somebody actually buys it for $1 billion, it doesn't matter what you say. It's all just noise. You're just declaring things. I've got some video games on my rack over there that are worth thousands of dollars. And until somebody buys them for thousands of dollars, they're not worth anything. This isn't news. What this is positioning to have the company get bought. I get that. Kaseya is interested in being bought. They're interested in having something done. Great. But it's not news. It just isn't. I don't think this is important. I don't think this is something that is worth covering. And frankly, there's nothing to see here. Kaseya, have you released anything interesting? Your press release talks about a litany of awards and such, but I don't actually see anything being created. Now, you've got new customers. You've grown. That's great. New sales. You're delivering your product. That's also great. But in order to be newsworthy from my perspective, you got to do something. You got to do something notable in a different direction. And I'm just going to call it out here. This is not that. This is just putting up a balloon that you want to get bought, and you're throwing out a big, giant number. I'm going to use my $1 billion pen, and I'm going to continue to make notes around this. Come back to me when you have something to talk about. Moving on, I want to talk actually about something that I was interested in, but I did not cover. Now, on last week's on the podcast, I did talk about some of the growth numbers that IDC and Gartner put out about the PC market. They actually had announced that the market had grown for the first time in a number of years, in fact, 9 years, according to this Microscope article. That's great, but my statement at the time was that I didn't find this particularly notable. I think that at best it's a mature market, and I think that you're going to see some leveling there. I don't expect this to be a big growth market. I think a couple of percent here, a couple of percent there, that just tells us that the market is stable. It doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what we might be talking about from anything larger. I don't think there's big opportunity here. I don't think there's diminishing opportunity, but I just don't see growth in this. But what I thought was more interesting was somebody actually did come out with the prediction that I made, which is it's not going to happen again. It's not going to happen in 2020. The Canalys, the folks that are industry analysts, have come up with the same analysis that I have, which is that, this is not going to continue to happen. That in fact, the growth that we may have seen this year was related to Windows 10 migrations, the end of life of Windows 7. If you should not be betting on this being a massive market. Now, it didn't make the podcast because admittedly, I didn't think I had anything new to add. This is interesting that another analyst has come out and said the same thing. That's cool, and I think that's notable. And if you want to go a little bit further, that's why I'm covering it on this live stream. But I didn't find this as particularly insightful from an additional perspective, although it's nice to be in a chorus of people now, at least two groups, myself and Canalys, that are saying this. So I think that was my takeaway with that. Next up, this one has been on my mind for a little while because I'm thinking a little bit about the way healthcare IT services are going. This one is interesting to me because it hits both healthcare and it hits the way to get money out of tech, which I think is something that's interesting. Look, I make this statement right now that I think people need to pay their taxes. I'm not saying that they're doing anything illegal by big tech dodging it, but when companies like Amazon are not paying any taxes, I think there's this fundamental problem with the system. So there's an idea here that British doctors are introducing to tax tech giants to fund the research caused by the harm of social media. This one was interesting to me in terms of when you see that kind of angle where we're linking directly the idea of the issue to fund it based on the people that potentially are causing this. If I substitute cigarettes and tobacco industry into this, you start feeling like it makes a lot of sense. The idea that if we were to tax the tobacco companies to do the research on the harms that their products were coming, you'd probably nod a little bit more. And thus, the parallels make a lot of sense for me on thinking about this one. I like this. I don't have a particular angle on this yet for Business of Tech. It doesn't fit into a larger story, nor anything more than the larger tax stuff that I'm thinking about. I really would be interested in hearing from listeners on what their thinking is around taxing social media companies, taxing technology companies, and the way these companies should be involved in solving these solutions from that perspective. I don't have a great angle or answer on it yet, but it is something that I'm thinking about. Thus, this was a story that I was interested in and that I did not cover, but that's kind of why. Links to all of these stories are in the notes from this live stream. Finally, the last story that I've been thinking about is, it was notable. I didn't even know that Wikipedia was off in Turkey, much less the fact that they're now come back. I've covered bifurcation of the internet a number of times on the Business of Tech. The fact that the internet is splintering into different groups, those that are kind of in the democratic side of things or the authoritarian side of things. So this fit into that storyline for me in terms of thinking about it. But I didn't really have a particular interest other than the fact that, hey, Wikipedia is now back online in Turkey. I actually tended to think about Turkey as one of the countries, or one of the countries that fit on the democratic side. I tend to think of them that way. They're a NATO ally. They are traditionally thought of in that way. So I actually hadn't thought that Wikipedia might be blocked. This is a story and a storyline that I think is super interesting to solution providers. I think you really need to start thinking about the way the internet functions in different regions of the world because it's not universally consistent. Not all countries that you would necessarily assume to be open and free are necessarily always that way. And I think that some of the discussion that we're going to have ongoing is thinking exactly about this. So that was the last story that I really had not come up with. So to give you a little bit of the way that I think about these, I actually break down stories on a daily basis to look for different trends and areas of discussion. I break them down on the Business of Tech podcast by covering them from a news perspective and a commentary perspective. I'm tracking a bunch of different stories at any given time, definitely reading from a number of news sources, and interested in what listeners like you think. There's a lot of different ways to interact. These live streams are one of the ways that I want to start having conversations. I want to use them on this kind of format to talk a little bit free form about where I'm thinking and why I'm interested in stories, and additionally use this as an opportunity to get feedback from listeners. I also intend to use them from a breaking news perspective to actually go ahead and talk when something breaks that I think the community wants to talk about, do it as a live stream format. So I'm really looking for that feedback. You can find me at mspradio.com. If you're interested in content like this, please subscribe to the podcast, available on all your favorite podcatchers. So you can find me on Apple, on Google, on Spotify, and on all the places where you can find a particular podcast. You can find live streams like this on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Periscope. And I'll be adding LinkedIn as soon as they allow me to. You can find videos on the MSP Radio LinkedIn site, on the Facebook page, as well as on YouTube. So really do look forward to those interactions with you and hearing back from you. Please subscribe. Look forward to ongoing conversation. You can find me at mspradio.com, and really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me today and for the opportunity to give you some of my opinions. Thanks, everybody.